Good morning, everyone. I just wanted to let you know I'm going to wait just one more minute before we get started. There are still people joining as I'm watching the screen now, so I just want to give them 1 second to get logged in, and then we'll get started. Thanks. All right, well, good morning, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and get started. Before I do, just a few things. I do want to thank you for taking time out of your busy day to join us for this affirmative action program. We're going to kind of focus on implementing your affirmative action program. My name is Kaylee Ferraro, and I am the manager of affirmative action services here at CAI, and I will be presenting today. A few housekeeping items before we kick off the presentation. Everyone's lines have been muted just to keep down background noise and such. If you have questions, there is a questions box on the GoToWebinar panel. Just type those questions into that box. We do have Christy Zimmerman, who is monitoring those questions. She will try to answer them during the program if she's able to. If she's not, we will follow up with you afterwards. So, or if there's something specific just to your organization, we'll follow up with you afterwards if we're unable to answer questions during the session. The second item is a copy of the presentation slides and a link to the recording will be made available and sent out via email after the presentation. It'll take us a couple days, but look for that. And if you have questions or don't receive it within a few days, certainly reach out to us and we'll make sure that you get it. And then really the next item is this presentation assumes some basic understanding of affirmative action, who's covered, what it really is. If you have questions either during the session or specifically just about, I need more detail into affirmative action, please reach out to us and we are happy to answer any of those questions at a later time. So we'll go ahead and get started now on the presentation. All right, maybe. Okay, so just a little bit about CAI. We are an employers association here in North Carolina with over 1,200 members, and we've been around for a while. We've been doing business with North Carolina companies for over 50 years, and we are a local resource for HR compliance and people development. And one of the areas that we do focus on is affirmative action, which is, of course, my group. We do offer services for those companies that are required to implement affirmative action. We can help you develop your written affirmative action program, offer advice and training in all manners of affirmative action, and provide audit assistance, if that dreaded letter comes to you. And we do offer quarterly webinars. Free for those who sign up. The next one is scheduled for June 21st, and that's going to cover kind of just the basics of affirmative action. So think Affirmative Action 101, and you can register on our website at capital.org. So just a few things as far as what I'm going to try to cover for the agenda. It's just really, what do you do once you have your affirmative action plan? What can you use out of the program to really focus on implementing that for your organization for the year? So I've just kind of listed a few of the items that I'm going to try to touch on today, and we'll again get to those as they come up. If you do have questions, again, make sure you're typing those into that questions box, or reach out to us afterwards. So my next slide is, congratulations, your affirmative action program is done. So if you are a calendar year implementer of affirmative action, maybe this is where you are. You've completed your program, and now you want to know, what do you need to do. As a federal contractor, you realize you do have to update and develop your programs annually. But does that mean that's it? Do you get to stop there? Unfortunately, no. There are other things that you need to be doing, and you should use your program, the results of your plan, as a guide for what you need to focus on throughout the year. And that's what we're really going to focus on today, using the results of the analysis that you've just completed to effectively implement or make changes that your organization needs. So use this program that you've developed as a guide. One of the first things that you can do, so where you can start, is taking a look at your affirmative action goal results to see what areas you need to focus on. So for the affirmative action programs, there's really kind of three sets of goals or targets that you need to look at for the year. There are placement goals for females and minorities, utilization goals for individuals with disabilities, and hiring benchmarks for veterans. So the next slide that I have identifies the goals for females and minorities that we established by comparing who's in our organization to who's available for us to have in our organization. These goals are established when we are below what is expected from a utilization standpoint, again, focusing on women and minorities within job groups. And so what you see on my screen are those job groups in which there are placement goals. And these are goals for the upcoming year. So for my 2018 Affirmative Action Program, you can see I do have 4 goals identified. There are 3 for minorities and 1 for females. So this report gives you an idea of, okay, well, here are areas in which we could be doing a little better. So what the placement goals mean is over the course of your affirmative action plan year, you would like to move people into these groups at the goal rate. And this is a percentage. So, if we are filling positions for our operatives group, so this is not entry operatives, but maybe a little higher skilled operatives, we would like to move minorities into that group at 81.27%. And that can be via a hire, that can be via a transfer or a promotion. So it's placements into the group. But this gives you an idea, again, based on the results that you've just completed, of where you should focus. What I tend to see in some organizations is, they complete their plans. These kind of live either electronically or on the shelf somewhere, and no one really takes these additional steps to try to meet these goals. So you should, when there are placement goals established, you need to focus on targeted recruitment or outreach efforts to ensure that you are giving opportunities for those groups that are identified here. Again, one of the common results I see is that companies just don't focus on developing intentional outreach and recruiting efforts for those job groups. And what happens is, if you're not audited, it's not really a problem, but if you are audited by the OFCCP and you have not developed any of these targeted efforts, then you don't have anything to provide when you're asked that question. And you are going to be asked, what have you done to try to meet those goals? And if you haven't developed anything intentionally, you can't show that you're meeting your affirmative action obligations here. Another issue or area that I see that can be a problem for companies is they often just rely on their applicant tracking system or a third-party vendor to just push their job listings out to various diversity boards, and they're not being intentional as far as who they're really looking to ensure they're including to have a diverse candidate pool that, again, focuses on those areas in which they're below the expected percentage. So again, be intentional. Think of things that you can do for the upcoming year to try to meet those placement goals. All right, the other 2 goals or targets for our affirmative action programs are going to focus on protected veterans or individuals with disabilities, and that IWD stands for individuals with disabilities. So for federal contractors or subcontractors, you are required to adopt utilization goals for individuals with disabilities for each one of your affirmative action plan job groups. That rate is set at 7%. So what that means is ideally you would like 7% of your employees in each one of your affirmative action job groups to have identified as disabled. So that's going to be your goal, your utilization goal for the affirmative action plan year that you're working on. The OFCCP does provide that 7% rate to us. They have stated they will periodically review and update that, although that rate has not changed since these requirements were implemented in 2014. So one thing that you should do throughout your affirmative action plan year is to make sure that your employees do have the opportunity to self-identify their disability status. On a side note, if your organization company-wide has fewer than 100 employees, that 7% utilization goal can be applied to the company as a whole and not to the individual job groups. Federal contractors and subcontractors also have to adopt a hiring benchmark for veterans, and that is done for each one of your affirmative action plan locations. That hiring benchmark is currently set at 6.7%. So over the course of your affirmative action plan year, you would like to hire veterans in at that 6.7% rate, or even better if you're higher than that. And then throughout the year, or at least annually, you do have to conduct a review comparing your organization to that utilization goal for individuals with disabilities, or to take a look at over the course of the year how you did towards meeting that hiring benchmarks. And if there are problems, either you haven't done enough outreach, or there are barriers to those groups being included, you would certainly want to fix that. All right, so you have to do something. You have to do some type of outreach for these groups. Well, where do you get started? What do you do? What I would say is take a look at what you've done previously. So one of your obligations for women and minorities is to take a look back at your prior goals. How did you do towards meeting those placement goals? So you can certainly take a look at your prior year results. Here were the goals we had last year. How did we do towards meeting those? So for operatives, we didn't meet or attain that placement goal, but we did for our entry-level operatives, and we didn't for labor. So what did you do for those entry operatives? Did you do any targeted recruiting previously? If so, then whatever you've done is potentially a good source to continue using. Or if you didn't have any specific recruiting efforts or sources that you utilized previously, then you're going to need to develop them. Focus on something that you can do. One thing that you can take a look at is, where are you getting your applicants? What sources are you using? And that will give you, some indication of whether or not, you have done some specific recruiting efforts, that they have been effective or not. So what I've done here is I just took my applicant data pool, and I just created a pivot table, and I identified what recruiting sources my applicants came from. So this identifies the different places that my applicants came from. Either they told us they came from, or we received information from LinkedIn or Indeed or something along those lines. So here are the number of applicants that came from those different sources. And so you can take a look at, if you were using a source or you're partnering with an organization, are you getting candidates from those sources or not? So again, just a quick look to see, just by sheer numbers, whether or not that's helping you or not. And if you are working or partnering with an organization, you're paying them money to post your jobs or to assist you with recruiting. If you're not getting candidates from that source, then maybe they're not a good partner for you. Maybe they don't supply candidates with the skills that you're looking for. So you wouldn't want to continue doing that type of recruiting if it's not effective for you, if it's not helpful for you. Plus, if you're spending money on it, we're all under budget constraints. You would certainly want to take that money and apply it somewhere that is going to provide you better matched candidates for what you're looking for. And then the right-hand column, what I've identified here are those people that I hired. Where did they come from? So you can see, just looking at the numbers, some of the sources that were, good places for my hires to come from. The NC Works online posting source, employee referrals. So again, it just identifies, hopefully, and this doesn't require a lot of information or technical skills to create just a quick pivot table in Excel. But if you do have, an online recruiting tracking system, potentially you can run reports to see that type of information, or if you're not collecting this information, it can help you in the future. So is that something that you can start doing? Is asking your candidates, where did you hear about us? Or is that something that can be done, via your electronic tracking system to provide that? If you are using a third-party source to help with recruiting, make sure you know where they're sourcing their candidates. Where are they looking? Are they looking at sites that do provide diverse candidates, or outreach for those groups? And if they're not doing that, then you're going to ask them to help you out, because you do need your diverse source, and ultimately it's your organization that's going to be responsible for that. All right. So just a few examples of places that you can, at least start researching or looking into for diverse candidates. The Urban League of Central Carolinas, Telamon Corporation, Goodwill Industries. Look at your local technical community colleges. They're a great source of candidates. They offer a lot of certifications or degrees, and they may have a great candidate pool for you to source from. And then there are certainly additional sources for specifically focused at females, a Society of Women Engineers or female executives. But try not to limit yourself just to pushing your job postings out to various boards. Think what you can do locally. Are there local organizations in which you can connect with a person or a contact? There are a lot of communities that offer assistance to those people who are unemployed or underemployed, and they are invested in the community. They want those people to be successful and to have a good match for a job. So if you can do a little bit of research around your local area to find those sources, reach out to them, set up a meeting, give them a tour of your organization, tell them the type of skills that you're looking for, and potentially they can help you with recruiting as they get those people in that they're going to work with. So just a few ideas. Certainly there are a lot of sources that you can utilize, but hopefully this at least gives you just an idea of things that you can do to start with. And then for individuals with disabilities and protected veterans, you are required to assess, again, on an annual basis, how you're doing towards meeting those utilization goals and your hiring benchmarks. You are required to annually assess those targeted outreach and recruiting efforts and find out if they're effective for your organization or not. Again, if they're not, you need to consider making a change. And you are required to collect some information on applicants, hires, and job openings over the course of the affirmative action plan year. And in your affirmative action programs for protected veterans and individuals with disabilities, you have to incorporate those data numbers for a 3-year period. So on an annual basis, you have to update that. It's a 3-year rolling period that you do have to report on. So if you are not collecting this information so that you can include it in your program, then that is something that you would want to focus on for the year. What can you do to change that so that you're able to pull this information? And I'm going to talk about those in a little more detail as we proceed on. So what I have here is a list of the job groups for my affirmative action program. These are specifically looking at the utilization of people who have identified as disabled. So you can see this final column here identifies that I do have some job groups in which we are below that 7% utilization goal. So you see the yeses here. Those that are blank means we're actually above that 7% rate. So you can see we have a couple job groups, my supervisors and my IT professional groups. We did exceed that 7% utilization goal. So we're doing good for those groups, but for the remainder of those job groups that we have, you need to ensure that there are no barriers for people who are disabled to be included in those groups. If there are, you would certainly want to remove those barriers. And then again, focus on what can you do to try to ensure that people that are moving into those groups or that are currently there would feel secure in divulging their disability status. This is one area that I get a lot of questions on for companies that I work with or just people that I talk to about affirmative action. This is sensitive information. You are relying on your employees to self-identify whether they are disabled or not. So what can you do to try to communicate that so that your employees do feel that they can provide this information if they, would qualify as disabled. Certainly, your communication is going to be helpful. Explain why you're asking for this information. You're a federal contractor. This is part of your obligations to do so. Explain why you're asking for it and what it's going to be used for. Again, annual reporting of affirmative action and what it's not being used for. It's not being used for any decision making. It's not being used for, issues with moving people to other positions. You're not using it for your benefits information. It is literally you need it to do these annual reports and to identify those areas in which you can focus on for additional recruiting. And you certainly want to try to create a culture of respect and openness. So again, people feel safe divulging this information should you ask for it. And then just know that this is information that you're asking your employees to provide. You are required to survey your workforce every 5 years for their disability status. There is an OMB approved form that you do need to use, again, and you have to do so on at least every 5 years because this is something that can change for people over the course of time. So if you have not already surveyed your workforce, then that is something that I would say you would need to look at over this affirmative action plan year. When can you, realistically survey your workforce? Or if you have done so in the past, make sure you're being aware of, again, you need to do so every 5 years. So at what point do you need to do that next? And then you do need to provide some kind of reminder in that 5-year period that people can certainly identify at any time. All right. So switching over to protected veterans. Again, this is a hiring benchmark. So we're not looking at who's currently in your workforce. You're looking at who you're hiring. So we'll take a look back for this affirmative action plan year at how we did towards meeting our benchmark previously. So the current hiring benchmark is set to 6.7%. So that's for the current 2018 plan. Well, last year, that hiring benchmark rate was equal to 6.9%. And over the course of my prior 12 months, when I took a look back at those people that I hired, the percentage of them that were veteran was 12%. So you can see that is greater than that 6.9% that was set at last year. So I did meet my benchmark, my hiring benchmark for veterans previously. So that's the type of information that you're going to do, again, on an annual basis. And certainly if you're audited, you're going to have to supply this information to them. And then you are required to assess annually your recruiting efforts. So I just have a sample here, specifically focusing on the veterans recruiting. I've listed, what specific outreach or recruiting activities we had in the prior year, listing jobs with the local veteran advocacy group, participating in a career fair. I spoke with vet reps at local community or at a local college campus. I identified when that occurred, kind of what happened in that source, and then the evaluation. This is something that you do as an organization. You determine whether or not those efforts are effective or not. And some criteria that you need to consider is, did this activity attract qualified applicants who are veterans? Did it result in the hiring of any of those veterans? And then just ultimately, did it expand your company's outreach into the veteran community? So you get to determine and evaluate if those efforts are effective or not. You need to do the same type of evaluation for your outreach and recruiting efforts for individuals with disabilities. Again, this has to be done on an annual basis. And again, you need to identify each source you're working with, and then identify and evaluate the effectiveness of that source for the period that you were working with. And then I mentioned that you do have to collect some information, some data that is going to be incorporated into your affirmative action program. What I have here is just kind of a chart that shows information on either job openings or hires or applicants specifically for veterans, but you need to collect the same type of information for individuals with disabilities. You do need to report on how many job openings you had during the year, how many of those jobs were filled, the total number of people you hired, and those that identified as either veteran or disabled, your total applicants, and then the total number of applicants who identified as veterans. So you can see I do have 3 years worth of data that I have incorporated into this chart that supplies that information. So you would want to take a look, at your affirmative action program. Are you able to report on this information? Can you identify how many job openings you had and those that were filled? So you may have opened, 53 jobs, but if only 50 of them had hires through the year, 3 of them are still open or were canceled or put on hold. Those positions didn't fill. Are you able to capture and report on that information? Usually you can easily get the total number of hires, and then of those people who identified as veterans, if you, again, collect that information. So those are usually easy sets of data that you can collect. But again, some of the other more challenging ones are total job openings of those that were filled, and then the applicant data. Do you have this data? Are you collecting applicant information? Are you getting it from one source? So are you collecting it through your applicant tracking system, or are you getting it from recruiters and they're just, accepting resumes or applications? Do you have all of that information somewhere that you can access and report on? If that is something that you don't have or isn't in great shape, then I would encourage you to, over the course of your affirmative action plan year, that would be one of your areas that you would want to focus on from an implementation standpoint. I need to, get a better handle on our applicant process, or, who's considered an applicant and who's not. And then another example of some sources that you can at least start with for recruiting for protected veterans and individuals with disabilities. I get asked a lot, hey, give me some examples of where I can do some recruiting for veterans or those people who are disabled. Unfortunately, there's not a one-size-fit-all source, so everyone on the line can't use the same source and get the same type of results, because some of the focuses of different recruiting groups may be different. They may, focus on skill sets that don't align with your organization. So you may have to do a little research, or it may be a trial and error. Let me reach out to the VFW and find out if they can, post jobs when we have them opening at their site, or provide it to their members. If that then yields candidates for you, then great. If not, and you're spending a lot of time sending that, there's constantly contact changes, and you're just not getting qualified candidates from them, then I would encourage you to make a change and find a different source that will be more aligned with your needs, and supply you candidates that are helpful. So again, these are just a few examples. I tried to provide some that are free, because I am aware that, again, we're all constrained by budget. So where can you start that is either low or no cost? And then if you are an organization who has some budget, or can plan for it for the upcoming year, there are a lot of sources in which you can either join or post jobs for fee. So certainly there are any number of options, but you'll have to do a little bit of work to find out, again, a good match for your organization. And I realize it's a struggle and no one has a lot of time, but I'm not suggesting you have to find 10 sources. I would say find one or two for veterans, find one or two for individuals with disabilities, and see how they go over the course of the year. And then again, evaluate them at the end of the year and find out, are we going to continue using them, or do I need to find a different source for next year? Another area that you have results from, hopefully, in your affirmative action program is taking a look at compensation. You are required to evaluate your compensation systems to determine whether there are gender, race, or ethnicity-based disparities. And then if there are, you certainly want to investigate why that is. You can pay people differently. It's allowed. It just can't be because of their race, ethnicity, or gender. So you are required to evaluate compensation to specifically look for these type of disparities. So this is different than just looking at comparing your organization to market rates. Again, this is focusing on gender or race disparities. When you do conduct these type of results, so what I've done here is I'm just looking in my analysis, I'm just looking at a percentage difference in pay. So I've identified and just kind of blocked off a few job titles, and I specifically am looking at the job title level, in which there is a difference in pay percentage between minorities and non-minorities that is, I'm going to say, significant. So it's over 5%. And for those, this quick analysis just shows the number of people that are affected. So for my machine operator job title, there are 35 minorities in that group, and they're paid again, percentage-wise, less than their non-minority counterparts. So again, about just over 5% difference in pay within this job title when I look at minorities versus non-minorities. And in that group, there's 35 people that are minorities. So when you are doing your compensation reviews, again, it's a requirement to do so. How you do that is left to your discretion. There's no specific way you have to conduct a compensation review or analysis, but you do need to take into account and look for gender or race disparities. And when there are disparities, you need to look at them. You need to do something with this. So just having this analysis and ignoring it is not meeting your affirmative action obligations. And I will say, during audits, this is one of the areas of focus that the OCCP has been spending time. They are looking for these disparities, and they are looking for you to show that these disparities are not because of race and gender. So you have to be able to justify why you're paying people differently, and that it's not the result of race or gender. So is it because someone has more seniority, they've been at the organization longer? Is it the education level? So certainly factor into your review and investigation those factors that that play into why you are paying people. If you're a professional level organization of engineers, then the type of engineering degree, how long they've been working in that industry are certainly going to, and the level of their degree is certainly going to factor into why you're paying someone different than someone that has a lower level degree. But when you're looking at, in my organization sample here, I just have machine operators. You're probably not going to explain salary differences or compensation differences by degrees. So there should be other things that are helping you set compensation. So again, time with company, time and position may be factors. If you are doing this review, and again, you should be doing this, make sure you can defend and have documentation supporting those defenses. I'll say, you look at your reviews, there may be a lot of job titles or groups that are flagged. Look for your high impact areas when you're doing these reviews, those that have maybe the largest difference in pay, or have the most number of people affected. Because if you are audited, the OFCCP is going to look at, looking at these are lower skilled, lower type entry level positions. It's going to be harder to explain salary differences or compensation differences for just skills. So again, harder to explain. And a little more challenging. Plus, the numbers are typically larger. There's a lot of people in these groups, so we're talking a lot more people affected than in some of my other groups that have disparities. If you're audited and you can't explain those salary or compensation differences, the OFCCP is going to make you make whole those people who are affected. So you have to bring their compensation up to where it should be. You may have to supply 2 years of back pay for those affected individuals. So those numbers are going to exponentially get bigger, meaning more dollar signs as you're doing that. So for you to do this type of investigation and review before those audit letters come in are going to be helpful because you can either correct issues. Maybe people are listed in the wrong job title, or there should be levels and there are not within job titles. You're going to want to correct that prior to an audit, or if there are just salary differences that you cannot explain and you need to correct them, then you can set a plan for making those changes. All right. Another area that we're going to take a look at is you are required to take a look at your employment activities on an annual basis. So specifically looking at your hires, your promotions, your terminations, and we're going to look for when those activities result in different selections. And that's what is typically termed as adverse impact. And the definition of adverse impact is, I'll read it to you, but it's an unwanted or unanticipated result of taking a particular action. So specifically in the business community, it's looking for selection differences in hiring, promotion, terminations that is disadvantageous to a particular race, ethnicity, or gender, so those protected categories. So again, you should be on an annual basis taking a look at the selections that you had for hires compared to the applicants, your promotions, your terminations, to make sure that the selections that you're making are not causing an adverse impact flag. So I have a sample of an adverse impact report that I ran for my little sample organization. And I'm specifically looking at, within job groups, I'm looking at titles. So oftentimes you're going to start with just looking at the selections by job groups themselves. So all of my operatives are going to be combined together. But if there was a flag for adverse impact for operatives, I may dig a little deeper and I want to look at, are there issues across the board or just for specific titles in that job group that would result in a flag here. So you can see in my sample analysis, I do have a an adverse impact flag for females in my forklift operator job title. And what this is looking at is it's looking at the selection rate. So I know there's a lot of numbers on here, but you can see I selected 9 males and 9 females, which, well, that seems pretty even. But the selection rate is comparing who you select from who was part of the pool. So there were 19 male applicants and I selected 9, which is just under 50% selection rate. But for females, I had 45 females that applied and I only selected 9 of them, which is a 20% selection rate. So you can see that there is a difference in the selection rates of males compared to the females. So there is an adverse impact flag. So what you should do is to make sure that you do some investigation. Do you know why? When you look back at that data, when you're looking at your applicants for the forklift driver position, why you selected those 9 males and why you selected the 9 females and why you didn't select those other people that were part of your applicant pool. An issue that we often see, it stems down to, well, who were your applicants? Can you identify, who needed to have been included in this applicant pool? How many applicants did we have? So those are things that, again, I would encourage you to take a look at for implementing your program. If there are issues from an applicant standpoint, you would want to investigate that. So certainly look where there are flags in your adverse impact, and that's looking at, again, hires, promotions, and terminations. And then I'll say one of the areas that we see most data concerns with is going to be that applicant pool. Who are your applicants? What happened to them in the process? So, are you providing your recruiters or hiring managers, or if it's you who are screening your applicants, are you identifying why you are screening people out? Is it because they didn't meet the basic qualifications of the job? Is it because you actually didn't even look at the applicant? Someone applied, but they applied after you were already too far in your interview process that you're not going to look back at applicants who applied after that period. So your disposition reasons for your applicants are going to be helpful for you, because for affirmative action purposes, you're able to narrow down your applicant pool from everybody who came into that big funnel for those positions, and you're able to funnel down to just people who you are making decisions on. So if you receive 400 applications for a receptionist position, you don't have to look at all 400 of those applicants. You can say, I'm going to look at the first 100 people, and then those other 300 people you didn't even review. So your disposition reasons for those people should reflect that you did not review them. And then of those 100 people that you did review their applicants, and 100 is a lot, but maybe only 70 of them met your basic qualifications. So your basic qualifications are you have to be able to work in the US without sponsorship. You have to, be able to work 8 to 5, and you have to have some basic understanding of, the office suite. So if people don't meet those basic qualifications, for affirmative action purposes, we don't have to include them in our applicant pool. So your disposition reasons should reflect that they didn't meet your basic qualifications. So again, take a look at what your application process is and how you are using your disposition reasons. Are they effective? Are they being consistently used by everyone who's doing the screening? Do your recruiters, if you have recruiters that are assisting you, do they know why this is important? And are they selecting the appropriate dispositions and not just picking some, basic not selected reason? Because again, the more people that are in your applicant pool, the more potential there is going to be for some variation. And this kind of carries over to my next area of focus is make sure you're communicating that you have have an affirmative action program. So there are different groups that should certainly have some information about what you're doing. You have to develop these affirmative action programs on an annual basis. Does anyone outside of you know know that you have one or know the results of that? So again, I've kind of broken this down into different groups that you may or may not share the same type of information. But does your executive and senior leadership team know that you've completed your program? Do they know the overall results? Do they know that there are some goals that you have and that you're going to try to work towards meeting? And maybe you just have one or two bullet items on things that you're going to work on over the course of the year. Investigating an applicant tracking system that will help you move people through the process and hire them quicker than having it be all manual and trying to screen resumes that are sent to various people through your organization. Your executives have influence over policies, culture, budget, so that they need to be kept apprised of this information. And there are some requirements to annually communicate this information to your management team. Your hiring managers or supervisors or those people who, again, may assist you with, recruiting or are making some personnel decisions. Are they aware that you're a federal contractor or subcontractor and that you have to do this affirmative action reporting? Do they realize that things that they are helping make decisions about are going to be impacted in your affirmative action results? So certainly you can communicate goals to them if that is helpful. We need to make sure we are doing more recruiting for females in our engineer groups. So you can certainly decide how much detail to provide these different groups, but certainly some communication is going to be helpful. And then again, I've spoken about recruiters before, but if they are helping with your applicant process, they need to know there are some requirements for doing specific targeted recruiting. If they're the ones who are sourcing your candidates, you need to make aware to them what groups they need to ensure they are focusing on, or at least doing some recruiting for. And going back to those dispositions, they need to identify when they are screening people out of the process, why they are not moving them on in the process. And then don't forget about your employees. Your employees should know that you're a federal contractor and you're subject to affirmative action. Again, you're going to, at least every 5 years, be surveying your workforce for their disability status. So this shouldn't be a shock to them that you have to do that. So some communication, in your handbooks, in your new hire orientation, to provide some of this information to them is helpful. And then similarly for your applicants, again, you should be providing self-identification opportunities of your applicants for not only disability status, but race, gender, and veteran status. You need to make sure that you are asking applicants or providing them the opportunity to disclose that information. They don't have to do so, it's voluntary, but they should, again, be provided that opportunity during that recruiting process. And then your vendors or subcontractors, you should make sure that they are notified that they could be subject to affirmative action as well. So if they are helping you fulfill your federal contract, they're now a subcontractor and they need to make sure they're going through the same process as well. So there should be some communication in your agreements with them, whether that's a purchase order or subcontract, that notifies them of their affirmative action obligations. And I recommend also sending annual letters to those organizations as well. And then just some miscellaneous things that you should make sure that you're able to do is you are required, if you are subject to the veterans affirmative action regulations, you are required to list your jobs with the appropriate state job service. So if you are recruiting externally for a position, you need to make sure that you are providing that job listing to the appropriate state's job service. So here in North Carolina, it's with the Division of Employment Security. They have an online NC Works site that you can go and post or list that information about your job. I've provided the link here so you can find that same type of information for all of the different states. So, if you're recruiting in Texas, then you need to make sure that that job is provided to the Texas Workforce Commission, or if you're doing it in Pennsylvania with the Pennsylvania, I forget what they called theirs, but certainly make sure that you're listing it with the appropriate service. Make sure you're reviewing your employment processes to make sure that it is open to all different groups, that you're not unintentionally or intentionally screening out different groups for hires, that you're not, again, making decisions or job descriptions that screen out people who are disabled if that is not a requirement of the job. Again, you should be taking a look at the physical and mental qualifications of your jobs, again, to ensure that you're not screening out people for those positions if that is not something that is necessary for the job. I've talked about it already, but the self-identification, you need to make sure that you're providing that opportunity to your employees, again, every 5 years for disability status, as well as to your applicants and your new hires, the race, gender, disability, and veteran opportunities self-identification. And then take a look at any requests for accommodations that you've had for either applicants or your employees. So if one of your employees asked you for an ergonomic chair, or there's a request for specific boots to work in the warehouse that will help with their back issues, any type of requests that are made, make sure you're tracking that, you're logging that someone has made a request and the result or the outcome of that request. So those are just kind of some really quick things that you can hopefully do quick and easy throughout the year to kind of check off some of your requirements for the affirmative action programs. I know I've covered a lot of information fairly quickly, and it can seem really overwhelming. Okay, there's a lot of things to do. I don't have time to do all of this, or I can't even think about doing some of this. But what can you focus on? Are there 1 or 2 items that you can start working on for your organization? I would, take a look at where you feel you could have the biggest impact on. Oftentimes that is, taking a look at your applicant process, how you're tracking that. There's a lot of information that goes into that. What can you do to make that easier on you going forward so that you can, get this information and you have it in a better format next year? Changing your record keeping requirements to make sure you're tracking accommodation requests, or that, if you haven't been providing self-identification opportunities for your applicants, that's something that you can start to implement now so that you have that information going forward. So again, certainly take a look at, I know we're all constrained, we're all stretched really thin these days, but really try to pick 1 or 2 items to try to focus on for the year that, again, will be impactful for your organization, or make your life easier down the line. If you've been accepting paper applications and you're trying to track this, and you end up having to manually type in information, is that something that you can change going forward? Is it an electronic application something that you can commit to investigating going forward? From a record keeping standpoint, it all goes into one spot. You can do exports or reports out of an applicant system. Even some lower budget applicant systems provide that same opportunity. So if you can get everything in one place and you're not having to manually work through things, that will make your life a little easier going forward. And then lastly, before I kind of look through some of the questions that have come in, just a few updates on the world of affirmative action. The OFCCP did send corporate scheduling announcement letters in February. Those are what they call courtesy letters or heads up letters. They sent 1,000 of those letters out in February to different organizations that say, hey, you're on our list for an audit this year. So again, it's a courtesy and advanced warning letter. If you have received one of those, certainly pay attention to it, because the OFCCP anticipated they would start sending the official scheduling letters March 19th. So that was this week. But depending on the workload of the different local or regional offices, it may be later in the year that you receive that. But if you received that scheduling, the corporate scheduling announcement letter, it means the likelihood of you receiving the official audit scheduling letter is a lot greater. So it gives you some time to start getting your your ducks in a row, collecting the information that you're going to have to gather for the scheduling letter, or if again you have not done some of the things that you should have been doing, it gives you time to start correcting those deficiencies ahead of time. And really the last item that I have before I kind of look at questions is they did just issue a directive 2018-01, which is a predetermination notice. This affects those contractors audited. That predetermination notice is going to start being used more often. It's something that in the past has been used that identifies within an audit those areas in which the OFCCP believes there are some issues. They are going to start using these for all audits. So if there are areas during the audit that they don't believe you have adequately explained, and that they think there could be some discrimination findings, they will send you kind of a form letter at the conclusion of the audit identifying those areas in which they think there are issues that you have not sufficiently explained. And then that will provide you 15 additional calendar days to refute those, provide additional explanations to hopefully, again, kind of make that process go a little smoother. They've said they're going to start using this to be a little more transparent with contractors, because oftentimes contractors during an audit wouldn't know there were any issues until they receive a notice of violation. So hopefully this helps open up the transparency of that audit if you are one of those lucky contractors who are selected. So any questions? I'm going to try to quickly look through any questions that came in. Bear with me a second while I do a little looking. It's hard to see here. I do see a question that says, I'm the only HR person at my company, and I don't have time to do all of this. And I tried I tried to explain or at least address this a little bit earlier. I certainly understand you are constrained by time and limitations, budget, that sort of thing. But are there areas that you feel you could be most at risk for? If so, focus on, again, one or two items. Pick one or two things that you can do. What I've seen that tend to be the areas that seem to have the most issues during audits tend to do with compensation. When there are issues, and it can be that it's just a record keeping issue. People are listed in the wrong job title, or they're not listed as part-time and they should have been. So it could just be some data issues, but certainly if you feel that there are some compensation issues or your results identify such, are there explanations that you can go ahead and look into, or are there things that you can try to address? And it doesn't mean that you have to, change someone's compensation right now, but can you plan to adjust that over the next 1 or 2 years, and look at it from a market perspective or internal equity perspective? So compensation tends to be a big one. Applicants and the applicant process tends to be one of the biggest issues. Just having a lot of applicants, that data is, it's not your employees, so you have limited access to some of that information that's provided, but what can you control? Can you make sure you're providing that self-ID opportunity so that you have people's race and gender? Are you using the disposition codes effectively so that we know that people don't meet the qualifications, or we didn't even review them? Because if we can pull people out from our AAP analysis because we didn't review them, then that's going to mean we have fewer applicants in in the analysis, and that can help from the adverse impact flag issue. And then really kind of focusing on some targeted outreach and recruitment. Really look, have you done anything specific for individuals with disabilities and protected veterans? If not, can you again look for one or two sources that you can look at over the course of this year and try to do some type of outreach. So again, you have a year to do this. So if you can pick 1 to 3 items to focus on, try to do that. Again, try to pick ones that either are your biggest pain or fear point, or the ones that are going to be the most impactful. And I see I am right at 11 o'clock. So unfortunately, I'm not able to answer any other questions during the session. We will certainly follow up with you afterwards if there are questions we were unable to answer during this session, or if you have questions that you want to reach out to us specifically. I have my contact information. I have Christy Zimmerman's contact information. We are happy to speak with you at any point in time. Certainly reach out to us, and we'll try to address any questions you have. Thanks again for joining, and I hope everyone has a great day. Thanks a lot.